Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Wold, and I'm a program specialist in placement services with Vocational Rehabilitation Services.
And I'm Sarah Sundin, also a program specialist, but on our community partnerships team, where I work as a liaison between our contracted partners and our VRS staff.
And so today we'll be talking about placement and follow-up services, covering the general and E1 performance-based agreements or PBAs. Our training objectives today we'll be looking at defining placement and follow-up services in the process, understand the difference between the E1 MN and the general PBA, understand the key components of the placement and follow-up services, know the importance and understand what the components are to the pre-job search activities, understand the conditions for a successful closure from placement and follow-up services, and yes, the paperwork part. So fun. All right, as we go on with this webinar, it will be handy for you to have these forms either open on your computer or printed off near you. We'll be going over in detail these forms, and you could pause the webinar now to gather those. And you can see on this slide is a link to our partners section of our deed website where you can find those forms. All right, so let's dive in how it all works together. So the process by which our job seekers find employment is through placement and follow-up services. Most times, VRS will contract with community partners and engage in a contract to pay for the services, and we call that a PBA. Sometimes VRS will utilize our internal placement coordinators if there's an unmet need for placement and follow-up services in a certain area. So in other words, the placement and follow-up services is the road we are on, and the PBA is the vehicle we use to get there. So VRS has two kinds of PBAs, a general and an E1 PBA. The E1 PBA is for job seekers who are on a Medicaid waiver, and the general PBA is for all others. The processes are similar with some distinct differences, which we will go into. So to pay for this to PBAs, we use a milestone structure. And here you can see are the amounts we pay for each milestone. You'll see the additional E1 milestone payment for E1 PBAs. So that makes the general PBA a total of $3,800 and the E1 PBA adding in that E1 milestone, that would add up to $5,000. And we'll be going more into detail about these specific milestones as we go forward here. So here's an overview, a nice visual of the entire placement and follow-up services process. So as you can see, there are pre-job search activities on the left there of this visual that take place before you, the placement professional, even joins the team. Then we move into the assigned placement plan meeting, which is PBA milestone 1. Then we move into the 60-day check-in, the first paid day of employment, which is milestone 2. We'll be checking in with that now employee as they're starting their job and up until we look at that last PBA milestone 3 of successful placement closure.
So let's begin at the beginning of the process. As Evie mentioned, before the placement even starts, counselors work with the job seeker to make sure they are ready for placement services. This is what we call pre-job search activities. During the pre-job search activities, the counselor will review and discuss the following with the job seeker. VRS uses a team approach, and we will discuss the roles of each team member. Remember, the counselor is the facilitator of the team, and all team members have important roles and expectations. In addition to our core team members, there may be other members, including family, social workers, or ILS staff. Informed choice, if possible, the job seeker is encouraged to visit or interview a variety of placement professionals, as it is ultimately the job seeker's choice in who they use for their placement and retention services. The job seeker and the counselor discuss interests, goals, skills, and abilities. They talk about labor market information and any criminal or background record information that might be pertinent to their job goal. For those individuals who want to explore how their credit or bankruptcy histories may impact their job goal, VRS counselors often use the Federal Trade Commission's website. In addition, it is important to review and discuss things like transportation, housing, care arrangements, whether that's for a child, a spouse, or a parent, medical insurance, cultural or religious considerations, disability disclosure, support systems that are available to them, and to verify employment eligibility documents to be completed with an I-9 form. One thing that we like to point out is that to verify employment authorization documents, counselors often use the USCIS as a good resource to see what documents are acceptable for employment, such as state ID cards or social security cards. We at VRS are not allowed to make a copy of the documents, but the counselor should be viewing them to ensure that the job seeker has the appropriate documents for employment. There are also items that are continuously reviewed and discussed throughout the placement process. You will see these services in the ribbon here. These include disability disclosure, supported employment, independent living services, benefit services, job coaching, and reasonable accommodations. These should be considered before placement services begin and also discussed throughout the entire placement and retention service process. The next step is to invite the placement to the team. When the counselor sends you an invitation to the placement team, they will also send you a copy of relevant sections of the assessment of VR needs and the completed sample application. The invitation to placement team form is used to invite the placement professional to join the team. Let's take a minute to review the information that is on the invitation to placement team form. As you can see, the invitation to placement team will let you know if they are inviting you to a general PBA or an E1 PBA placement. It will give you information on the job seeker and contact information for the VRS counselor. You will also receive the information that is required, and sometimes you will receive information if it is available on assessments or resumes or independent living needs. You will see that the invitation to placement also talks about job goals and information on training and education, the job seeker's desired work hours, shift preferences, wage ranges, information on their benefits, their transportation, and other important information to consider as the job seeker is looking for employment. The VRS counselor will also send a completed sample application along with the invitation. As you can see, this is a generic job application that is prepared for you to assist with placement services and the development of a resume. The sample application is generic in use, but it will give you a lot of really important information as you start to work with the job seeker and get to know their background and their work history. Out of respect and courtesy to you, in preparation for the meeting, it is preferred that and recommended that all of the forms be sent with the placement to the placement professional at the same time. If a job seeker is involved with an agency approved project such as individual placement and supports or IPS, many of the pre-job search activities are completed jointly with the VRS counselor, placement provider, and likely a mental health provider. No invitation to placement team form is completed with IPS The IPS Placement Services uses their time to get to know the job seeker, and the process involves rapid engagement. In addition to IPS, if the job seeker is in customized employment and completing a discovery assessment, the placement professional and the counselor should consult to ensure the pre-job search activities are addressed and documented in the customized employment plan. An invite to the waiver case manager is offered, but they are not required to attend the invitation to placement and the placement planning meeting. Now let's look at the job search's key components that begin with the signed placement plan. This is milestone 1 and is the first payment. So what happens during the signed placement plan meeting? At this time, you can see our template for identifying the responsibilities of each core team member is collected in the VRS placement plan. The job seeker, the placement professional, and the VRS counselor, if applicable. We also include the waiver case manager. All of the responsibilities should be identified and agreed upon by the team during the placement plan meeting. Not all items will be applicable to each job seeker, and we need to make sure we only select the items that apply. So when you look at the VRS placement plan, we will talk about the job seeker and all of the team players who are involved in that case, the job goal that was agreed upon, the job seeker's skills, the wage range, hours per week and shift preferences, their transportation, the geographical area for their job search, and other important information. And then we will look at the job seeker's responsibilities, the placement professional's responsibilities, and possibly a pre-ETS representative's responsibilities, and a waiver case manager's responsibilities if they are in an E1 PBA. It is possible for placement professionals to use their own form rather than the VRS placement plan, but it is very important that the placement plan form clearly identifies the roles and responsibilities for all team members. We understand that partners sometimes want to use their own forms and add other items that are needed for their uses. Please note that only one placement plan form is needed, whether you use the VRS plan or your own agency plan. It's also very important, regardless of which form you choose to use, that everyone agrees upon and signs that plan. And then everyone gets a copy of the signed plan. So during the placement plan meeting, in addition to roles and responsibilities, the 60-day meeting is scheduled. We'll discuss 60-day meetings in a little while, but the VRS counselor should invite the waiver case manager to 60-day meetings, although again, they are not required to attend. It is important to consider the meeting's intent and purpose. This is the first meeting with all the core team members, the job seeker, placement professional, and VRS counselor. The meeting is to establish rapport with the job seeker and have meaningful discussion and share ideas regarding their job search. The meeting is about the job seeker and what all of us need to do as a team to help them achieve success. So try to remember that the focus is on creating a positive experience for them. It is the expectation of the placement team to approach that you will review the documents sent by the VRS counselor and complete any of the necessary paperwork ahead of time, so that the meeting truly focuses on that job seeker and their needs and not on filling out forms. After the signed placement plan meeting, the community partner will submit a copy of the signed placement plan and an invoice for milestone 1. Due to data privacy, the invoices should go to the email listed on the authorization. If you have invoicing questions, there is a section on the Deed Community Partner website that details invoicing requirements. All right, let's review some of the communication expectations during a PBA. All placement professionals will attempt at least weekly communication with the job seeker and explain weekly assignments to the job seeker and the placement professional that each will complete. There is a minimum standard to be adjusted based on the individual needs. We realize situations may occur where a job seeker or placement professional may not be able to communicate each week as scheduled, but attempts should be made. When you develop a resume for the job seeker, please be sure to share a copy with VRS. Monthly progress reports are required and continue throughout the entire placement and retention service process. These reports are not meant to replace communication that should certainly occur between the placement professional and the VRS counselor. Let's take a quick look at the monthly progress reports. As you can see in the monthly progress report, the information we are looking for is information in the header about who the job seeker is and who is on the team, and looking at job search updates. So a summary of what the job seeker's activities have been in the last month, what the placement professional has done, understanding if all the meetings were attended by the job seeker and placement professional. If the answer is no, we are interested in knowing why a meeting did not occur. Was it canceled due to scheduling conflicts? Was it a no-show? What is going on? The number of employer contacts by the job seeker and or placement professional, the name of employers where the job seeker applied and interviewed for. It would also be possible to put a job log in here. The number of job interviews and the results of a job interview that month. Any details on declined job offers, and a general question of what is going well with the job search process. We also want to know plans or changes for the next 30 days and why. The next section of the monthly progress report is filled out when an individual has completed their first shift. And this would be all the important information that we need about a job seeker's new job. And then the third section is filled out when job placement follow-up services close. This is what we consider our final report. And again, it is a summary of the employment information, the benefits that that individual has, and who did you get that information from, and then a little closure summary. So that is what we look for every month. VRS requires the use of this monthly progress report. This is a standard template that everyone must use. This report should be sent by the 10th of the following month. For example, January's monthly progress report should be submitted by February 10th. Monthly progress reports should be emailed to the general team email address listed on the authorizations.
All right, so this is a question we get quite a bit. What is placement? What does that mean? Just don't let the name fool you. Placement doesn't mean just plunking someone into any old job. It's really the process of job searching. We're into the job search phase of the PBA now. The job search really should be customized for each job seeker depending on their skills, interests, and conditions. During that job search phase, you'll begin working with the job seeker on many activities. So let's go over a few of those activities. The biggest one, probably identifying and developing those job opportunities. So it may involve researching the labor market, contacting employers, showing the job seeker resources like career force classes, researching jobs on Minnesota Works, Indeed, and other job boards. You may be helping them with creating and updating their resumes. We know this is an ongoing process that's really customized to fit the job they're currently applying for. We'll be completing employment applications, paper and online. We know that these applications can be challenging at times. And also there's pre-employment tests and assessments like personality and aptitude tests. We often help the job seekers prepare for job interviews. We may be reviewing and practicing sample interview questions, arranging mock interviews, and possibly informational interviews when needed. We complete cover letters and thank you letters and discuss the importance of those letters with the job seeker. It's also helpful to possibly create a template for them to use. We also make sure that the job is a good match. We want to assess the position and the environment and determine if there's any needed supports to help them be successful. And we may work with employers to identify and eliminate barriers. We may suggest modifications to employers, look at structural or attitudinal barriers if the person is comfortable disclosing. So that's a list of placement services, but what we do, we know it isn't always limited to that list. It's really about meeting that job seeker where they're at. So the next process, as Sarah alluded to, is the 60-day check-in, and that happens obviously 60 days following the placement plan meeting. So at that meeting, we really ideally want it to be an in-person meeting. We know that in this virtual world, sometimes that's not always possible. So we could meet virtually, but ideally it would be done in person. As I said, 60 days after the signed placement plan meeting, and this meeting will recur every 60 days until the person finds employment. During the meeting, these meetings are great for looking at progress, looking at any barriers that are coming up, assessing the job goal, and brainstorming together really to support and implement new strategies. Since this meeting recurs every 60 days until the job seeker becomes employed, before concluding the meeting, we should be setting up the next 60-day meeting. Again, the waiver case manager would be invited to these meetings, but not required to be there. We don't want to hold up the process waiting for an opening, but the counselor will convey any changes or pertinent information to them after the meeting is done. All right, let's move over into the E1 PBA milestone. This milestone is specific to E1 PBAs. It doesn't happen with our general PBAs. It's paid at 120 days of service, and that would be 120 days, likely 120 days from the date of the placement plan meeting. It can take place before or after milestone 2, which is the first day of work, depending on how it falls. When you're going to be submitting an invoice for that, make sure that you've submitted all your monthly progress reports and the 60-day meetings have occurred. All right, so let's go over a couple of examples of how the E1 milestone can occur. So I said it can occur before or after the person starts work. So let's look at Jenny and Greg. Jenny starts working with you on March 1st, and that's her placement plan meeting. She doesn't have a job yet on July 1st, so she hits the 120 days of service and you submit the E1 milestone invoice. She then gets a job on July 10th and you submit the second milestone, which is the first paid day of employment. In this case, in Jenny's case, the E1 milestone happens before milestone 2 happens. On the other hand, Greg starts working with you on March 1st and gets a job pretty quickly on May 1st. So you submit milestone 2, which is the first paid day of employment. After that, while Greg is working, he hits that 120 days of service, and you can at that time then submit the milestone for the E1 milestone and invoice. So again, please remember that the E1 milestones only occur when someone is on a waiver and in that E1 PBA.
All right, let's talk about job offers. The job seeker you are working with got the offer they were hoping for. Once a job seeker has been offered employment, there is a lot to consider. It is important to contact VRS when the job offer has been received, and of course, discuss with VRS and the job seeker any support needs that are needed, uniforms, clothing, shoes, reasonable accommodations or assistive technology needs, discussing transportation arrangements to and from work, and discussing scheduling conflicts such as medical appointments or childcare needs. It will also be important to consider and address any new discoveries regarding the job seeker's background and barriers to successful employment. It is important to have a discussion and consider meeting with the job seeker to assist them to prepare for their first day of work and orientation. This can be helpful for the individual, especially if they're a little anxious about starting work. You can discuss any questions they may have or assist in completing any paperwork they have for their new job. And if they are receiving any government benefits, to help ensure that the individual understands their responsibility to report their earnings. And of course, communicate with the employer as appropriate and convey findings to the VRS counselor as necessary. So let's talk about the first day of paid employment. The placement professional provides the VRS counselor with job offer information as soon as possible and the monthly progress report no later than 7 days after employment has started. You should collect and record the employer name and address, wage, job title, hours, start date, level of benefits, and the name of the person who gave you that information. We also want to know the date that information was received. This day 1 of employment begins the employed for 90 days clock. This is also the milestone 2 payment of the PBA. The community partner placement professional submits the monthly progress report with the job hire details on page 2, along with an invoice for the second PBA milestone. Remember, to be paid that milestone, all monthly progress reports prior to the milestone 2 must have been received by VRS. Let's talk about job placement and follow-up services. It is important to remember that we have 2 different 90-day clocks when we're talking about the placement process. The first clock is employed for 90 days. This is the clock you, as placement providers, should be tracking. Day 1 of the employed for 90 days clock is that first day of paid employment. This clock tracks the 90 days to reach PBA milestone 3 and tracks the placement and follow-up services closure. The second clock is achieved 90 days of employment stability. This clock is not tracked by providers, but we want you to be aware of that in some cases, VRS may have a person open longer than our placement providers. Achieve 90 days of employment stability tracks VR closure. Once employment stability is reached, this starts the achieved 90 days of employment stability. This is tracked from VRS staff. This could be that day 1 is the same or later than day 1 of employed for 90 days. Again, this clock may match employed for 90 days or it could be different. So let's walk through an example. All right, here is what employed for 90 days looks like for Sam. Sam starts a new job on February 1st. There is a job coach on site providing intensive training supports for the first 2 weeks. This is day 1 of employed for 90 days. On February 15th, Sam, the job coach, and the VRS counselor agree he no longer needs job coaching. Follow-up services continue. This is day 15 of employed for 90 days. On May 1st, Sam is still working and doing well on their job. This is day 90 of employed for 90 days. VRS will pay milestone 3 when the final monthly progress report and invoice are submitted. Placement and follow-up services will be closed. Here's what achieved for 90 days of employment stability looks like for VRS. Sam starts their new job on February 1st. There's a job coach on site providing intensive job training supports for the first 2 weeks. Though this is day 1 of employed for 90 days, VRS puts Sam into job coaching status. Then on February 15th, Sam, the job coach and VRS counselor, agreed that he no longer needs job coaching. This is day 15 of employed for 90 days. And now this is day 1 of achieved 90 days of employment stability. The counselor will move Sam from job coaching to in employment in Workforce One, and the placement professional continues to provide follow-up services, checking in with Sam often during his employment. Again, Sam maintains his job and continues to work on May 1st and has reached employed for 90 days. The placement professional can now bill for milestone 2, and the job placement and follow-up services can be closed. Then 2 weeks later, Sam has continued working. He is happy with his job and on May 15th. And now he has achieved 90 days of employment stability. VRS talks with Sam, and if no other services or supports are needed, VR can move towards the file towards outcome closure. Just remember that VR may keep a person open longer than employed for 90 days, but job coaching does not impact the employed for 90 days clock. It will be very important for you, the community partner, to track employed for 90 days and know that VR will track achieved 90 days of employment stability.
All right, so we want to talk about once the job starts, what now? And now we're in a phase of follow-up services. And follow-up services are part of all PBAs. It involves contact with the individual and possibly the employer on or off the job site using the agreed upon mode of communication, maybe email, text, phone, face-to-face, to determine the ongoing satisfaction with the terms of their employment. We require a minimum of 2 contacts per month with the individual while in follow-up services, and we'll be looking for those monthly progress report documenting those follow-up contacts. Additional communication with the VRS counselor may be required if additional services are needed, like job coaching or assistive technology. All right, so let's talk more about the follow-up check-ins. This is really an important step in the process. We want to help them maintain their employment, and we want to maintain that connection with that individual. It really is the time where we look to make sure that all those supports are in place so that person can be successful. We really want to watch for any changes with supervisors, any changes in that work culture, that job satisfaction, housing, childcare, and that wage reporting. If anything is changing with those pieces, we really want to pay attention to that, communicate that to the VRS counselor. So remember that those monthly progress reports continue until closure, that the placement professional should follow up twice a month while someone is working. The supports must match that person's unique needs. And if there is a job coach, the partner should provide an update weekly, and we'll talk about that next. All right, so job coaching is a layered service within PBAs. So you may have a performance-based agreement and need to add in job coaching services. Excuse me. All right, when you layer services like a PBA and job coaching, our community partners need to complete paperwork requirements for both services. So in this situation, while in a PBA follow-up, we need to get those monthly progress reports. And if you're doing job coaching, then it also requires weekly updates and the job coaching report as well. The weekly updates can be done by email, phone, or in writing. And since job coaching is a separate service, there's reporting guidelines for that service as well. Just to know, our VRS staff, VRS counselors can authorize up to 60 hours of job coaching, and we could go beyond that, but the counselor would need to get their approval from their supervisor. When you submit the invoices, please do so through the secure mailbox. And our community partners can use their own job coaching report as long as it contains the elements that VRS's form contains. And we can take a quick look at the job coaching report now. So as you can see, it's a general report. header information, and then important to include all the service dates and times, numbers of hours, and a short description. So those are the basic elements that would be on the form. So if you use your own, it's okay, as long as those elements are there. All right. So we know that there might be differing opinions when deciding what is follow-up and what is job coaching. It's important to have the conversation that is key and discuss with the placement team to ensure the job seeker gets the supports and services they need prior to the service starting. So there's separate services, and job coaching is layered on top of the follow-up. So let's look at a side-by-side. So follow-up is provided to all new employees. It would be assistance with the new employee orientation, initial paperwork, help the person adjust to their employment, getting feedback from the employer possibly on work performance if they've disclosed to their employer that they're working with you, and identifying services needed to maintain or advance an employment, and that orientation and paperwork assistance as well. Then we look at job coaching. Job coaching is really considered intensive training and supports specific to that person's learning needs. It could be facilitating communication with an employer, educating the employer about individual needs. It may include assistance with the creation or use of visuals, checklists, timers, utilizing apps, lots of different assistance that job coaches can provide with tools. It's important for our partners to stay in communication with VRS. So if job coaching is needed, once a job is secured, that's the time to request an authorization. And we know that timing is everything here. So we try to prepare as best as possible, but we know sometimes we need last minute job supports, just like we do with uniforms or shoes that are needed for work. We want to approach urgent matters in the same way. And we know that there's some gray between follow-up and job coaching. Not every person will need job coaching, and we'll want to assess the service need based on that person, what the placement team learns about that person throughout that job search process, and the position that the person accepts. So as I said, partnership and communication will be the key here. And we say, when in doubt, consult. And Sarah has a great example of follow-up versus job coaching that she's going to share.
As a former placement specialist, I would sometimes say that you just know when the support you provide is follow-up or job coaching. But here's how I see the difference with follow-up and job coaching. And here's a real life example. My son, who is 16, had his first job this past summer. So when he was applying for work and starting everything, I helped him with the W-2 paperwork, his direct deposit forms, and I made sure that he read and signed all of those consents and acknowledgements that end up in your orientation packet. This would be follow-up service, something we make sure that every new worker has in place. He and I also talked about his uniform, what he needed to wear. This is also follow-up services. We talked about his work schedule. Did he know how to access it? Who was he supposed to talk to if he was sick or needed to call in? Is he able to trade shifts? All of these questions and discussions were also follow-up services. He marks his availability for work on a monthly calendar. So I checked in with him each month to make sure he had completed it and turned it in. Again, this would be follow-up services. When he came home from work, I would ask him how his day was. Sometimes we talked about something that was really frustrating or really exciting that happened. I listened to him and I assisted with processing some of his situations. Again, this would be follow-up. However, if he had needed extensive help to understand that new employee orientation information or had issues with comprehension, this could be job coaching. If he was working and even with the employer supports had challenges with remembering the order of how to do his tasks or if he needed help in creating a checklist of his duties, creating or using visuals, setting timers and cues, or other apps that could be job coaching. And if he had needed assistance in talking with his employer for extra training or supports, or getting an accommodation in place, again, that could be job coaching. So that was kind of how I saw his summer experience, and the difference between follow-up, that is support that every job seeker, every new employee needs as we go into job security, versus the extra pieces that might be needed if he had needed job coaching. So, yay, we say the job seeker has now been working for 90 days. So this is the final step in the placement process, the successful placement closure. This is also known as PBA milestone 3. So let's look at closure considerations when we look at a PBA. Placement and follow-up service closure considerations. For closure, it will be important to ensure the following conditions. The position matches the job goal. They're paid at least a minimum wage and customary wage and benefit level. The number of hours per week is adequate with their goal. They're working in a competitive integrated setting. They have the ongoing supports that match their needs. That they've reached 90 days of employment with the same employer or position unless they've made an informed decision for a successful temporary assignment. And that VRS has a record of service need not to be closed before the community partner has received that milestone. So this form you can browse through and looks at details of what is needed for follow-up service closure conditions when you are working with an individual. So also important is payment for milestone 3. So it will be important that you submit that monthly progress report. And this monthly progress report would be your final monthly progress report with the details on the accepted job offer and the employment verification at closure all complete. An invoice would accompany that monthly progress report, and VRS would ensure that all monthly progress reports have been received since the milestone 2 or the E1 payment had been made. So now that we've made it through the PBA process, we want to pivot to talk about some clarity in some PBA special circumstances that may come up.
All right, so we'll move in now, as Sarah said, to some special circumstances that you might encounter. The first is considerations for the continuation of placement and follow-up services after someone hits that 12-month mark of a PBA. So you've been working with that person now since the placement plan, it's now been 12 months. If job search continues beyond that, we really have 3 options that we look at. The first, that the progress in the job search is continuing and the team agrees that the person is making progress. At that point, we want to cancel the existing PBA and encumber a new PBA. The new PBA will include all the milestones, starting with milestone 1, the first, the placement plan. So, and a new placement plan should be done, and we'll work through those milestones again. As always, the individual services are determined by the counselor and that job seeker. The second scenario would be if placement services have stalled out or stopped. The person and the team agree that the job search should be discontinued, and maybe another service outside of job search, like job shadows or business tours, exploring careers, that may be necessary in identifying potentially a new job goal. At that point, the existing PBA should be canceled. The counselor, the person, and the team can look at what other services are required and who could provide those services. The third situation would be the person has received VRS and job search services through a provider, and VRS determines the person can no longer benefit from continued placement services after that year mark. So the team agrees that placement services have been exhausted and the remaining PBA is canceled. The person may be referred to another agency, such as the county, for required services, and the VRS case may be closed. So make sure to remember that in all cases, the VRS counselor makes the final decision on those PBA authorizations. The next scenario that we sometimes run into is holds during a PBA. And we know that holds, they take up a spot on your caseload, they encumber money, and we know that we provide support during holds. There will be situations when someone needs to put a pause on their job search, though. It could be the provider or the job seeker, like maternity or paternity leave. Somebody may be on an extended vacation. So when a PBA is paused for more than 2 weeks, a hold will be discussed with the placement team. When placement services are on hold, of course, communication, again, we keep coming back to that, is important. And minimally at 30 days, VRS will be checking in with that job seeker. At 60 days, a meeting should be held with the placement team and a decision should be made about next steps. PBA clocks are also put on hold. This pauses that 120 days of service and also the 12-month mark, and would extend that time out. At that time, at the time of the 60-day meeting, the next steps could be scheduling a date to resume job placement services, and that would be committing to setting a calendar date and resuming services. The other option would be closing job placement services. So if the job seeker is not ready to commit to return, then a discussion about closing that PBA should occur. The placement team should always stay in communication. The job placement services closure, it's at the discretion of the counselor and the job seeker. And oftentimes, if this happens, the counselor will be consulting with their supervisor. It's really an individual decision. And if the person at that 60-day meeting says, I want to continue, but I can't start for a little bit, as long as they're committing to resuming, we're going to continue on as we can. So that concludes the special considerations, and there's Sarah and I jumping for joy because we have reached the end of that part of the presentation. The next slide, we've got some great resources for you. All the trainings, the forms can be found on our partners website, which is linked there. A VRS placement specialist like Sarah, all of those individuals are listed on that second bullet, the link there. The next, if you are interested in getting emails from Voc Rehab Services on updates and trainings, please email Carla Eckhoff to get on that list. This training today was really a broad overview of placement services. The Minnesota Rehabilitation Association, MRA, has some really good placement 101 and job coaching training that goes more in depth. And there is also a section, that last bullet highlights, if you want a little bit more information on invoicing requirements, that would be listed there. So we want to thank you for listening today. We hope you learned. Please feel free to reach out to Sarah or I, or any of the individuals on the previous slide for any follow-up information. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.